I thought this trip was just about signing papers. But when my key refused to turn and I saw curtains I never bought, I knew my second home had been hijacked. Then my sister walked out, calm as could be, claiming our mother gave her permission. The real horror wasn't her audacity, though. It was the piece of paper taped to the refrigerator, a lease agreement featuring a signature that looked terrifyingly like my own. My name is Morgan Rogers, and at 34 years old, I had structured my life around a series of very specific, very rigid controls. I worked in risk compliance. My entire career was built on the premise that if you looked at a situation hard enough, if you analyzed the variables with enough scrutiny, you could predict the disaster before it happened and steer the ship away from the rocks. I was the person who read the fine print. I was the person who double-checked the insurance policy. I was the person who never, ever just showed up somewhere without a plan. So, when I pulled my SUV into the driveway of my property in Harbor Point, South Carolina, I was already running a mental checklist. This was supposed to be a transactional visit. I had a photographer scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. I had a meeting with a property management firm at 4. The goal was simple. I was going to put this house on the long-term rental market, generate a passive income stream, and use that capital to finally launch my own independent consultancy firm. It was a strategy I had been building toward for 5 years. The drive down from the city had been peaceful, the kind of solitary confinement I usually cherished. The low-country landscape, with its marsh grass turning gold in the late afternoon sun and the heavy, humid air hanging over the palmettos, usually signaled a time to relax. But today, the house was strictly an asset. It was a 3-bedroom coastal cottage that I had bought at the bottom of the market, renovated with my own bonuses, and maintained with obsessive care. I parked behind a sedan that I did not recognize. That was the first red flag. But I brushed it off. Perhaps the neighbors were having guests and had overflowed into my driveway. It happens sometimes in these beach communities. I grabbed my leather portfolio, checked my phone to ensure the photographer was still on time, and walked up the front steps. The porch looked different. The rocking chairs I had positioned perfectly to face the sunset were angled inward, toward each other, and there was a small pile of sand-covered shoes by the door. Not adult shoes, children's shoes, 3 pairs, in ascending sizes. I felt a prickle of irritation. If the neighbors were letting their kids play on my porch, I would have to have a polite but firm conversation with them about liability. I reached into my bag and pulled out my key ring. I selected the brass key for the front door, the one with the blue identifier tag, and slid it into the lock. It went in halfway and stopped. I frowned, jiggling it slightly. Sometimes the salt air made the tumblers sticky. I pulled it out, wiped it on my blazer, and tried again. It hit a hard metallic wall inside the cylinder. It was not the wrong key, it was the wrong lock. My stomach gave a strange, violent lurch. I stepped back and looked at the hardware. It was shiny, new, and definitely not the brushed nickel set I had installed 2 years ago. This was cheap, polished brass. I looked at the electronic keypad deadbolt above it. My backup system. I punched in my 6-digit master code. Nothing. No beep. No whir of the motor. The keypad didn't even light up. It had been disabled or replaced entirely. I stood there for a moment, the ocean breeze rattling the palm fronds behind me, feeling a sensation that was entirely foreign to my carefully curated life. I was locked out. I was standing on the deeded property that I paid the mortgage on, the property that was the cornerstone of my financial future, and I was physically barred from entry. I raised my fist and pounded on the door. The sound was loud, aggressive, and entirely necessary. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sharp. "Is anyone in there?" I expected silence. I expected to have to call the police to report a break-in or a squatter. I was already mentally drafting the police report, but I didn't get silence. I heard the distinct sound of cartoons, the muffled, frantic music of a children's show. Then, the sound of footsteps. Not the heavy, hurried steps of an intruder caught in the act, but the slow, rhythmic padding of someone walking in their socks. The lock clicked, the door swung inward, and there stood my sister. Brittany Voss was wearing oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt that I recognized because I had donated it to Goodwill 3 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was holding a half-eaten granola bar. She looked at me not with fear, not with surprise, and certainly not with guilt. She looked at me with a mild, vague annoyance, as if I were a solicitor interrupting her afternoon nap. "Oh," she said, "you're here early." She stepped back and left the door open, turning around and walking back into the house as if she had just invited me in for a scheduled tea date. My brain stalled. The cognitive dissonance was so severe that I couldn't speak for 10 seconds. I stepped over the threshold, my heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. The interior of my house was gone. The structural walls were the same, but the soul of the place, the clean, minimalist, coastal aesthetic I had spent thousands of dollars perfecting, had been erased. In the entryway, where I had hung a piece of abstract local art, there was now a dry erase board screwed directly into the drywall. It read, "Voss Family Rules," in colorful marker, listing chores and bedtimes. I walked into the living room. My cream-colored linen sofa was covered in a violently patterned throw blanket. There were toys everywhere. Legos were scattered across the rug like landmines. A plastic fortress occupied the center of the coffee table where my architectural digest books used to be. The air didn't smell like the sea salt diffuser I left plugged in. It smelled of warm milk, laundry detergent, and something distinctly savory, like pot roast, on the floor. My 3 nieces and nephews, ages 5, 7, and 9, were sprawled out on beanbag chairs that I definitely did not own. They looked clean. They looked happy. They were eating snacks out of bowls that belonged to my grandmother's china set, the one I kept in the display cabinet for special occasions. Brittany flopped onto the sofa, right on top of the throw blanket, and picked up a remote control. "Brittany," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "What are you doing?" She didn't look away from the television. "Watching a show. The kids have screen time until 4. "No," I said, the shock beginning to curdle into a cold, hard rage. "I mean, what are you doing in my house? Why are my locks changed?" Brittany sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation of air, and finally paused the TV. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. The kids didn't look up. They were used to their mother's drama. "We needed a place, Morgan," she said, her tone dripping with unearned victimhood. "The lease on the apartment was up, and Gary was being a jerk about the deposit. And honestly, the school district here is better for the boys." I stared at her. "You moved in? You just moved in?" "Mom gave permission," she said. She dropped the sentence like a trump card, like a magical incantation that superseded property law. "Mom?" I repeated. "Mom doesn't own this house. I own this house. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage." Brittany rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so technical. Mom said you weren't using it. She said it was just sitting here empty, gathering dust while I was struggling. She said it was sinful for family to have empty bedrooms when family needs a roof." I felt the blood draining from my face. This was the Caldwell family dynamic distilled to its purest, most toxic essence. Brittany, the chaotic one, the one who needed help, the one who had 3 kids by 2 different men and no career plan, and me, Morgan, the one who figured it out, the one who paid the bills, the one who was expected to absorb the impact of Brittany's collisions with reality. "I am not using it," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was dangerously quiet. "I am preparing it for rental. I have a photographer coming in 2 hours. I have a business plan." "Well, you can cancel them," Brittany said, picking at a loose thread on the sofa. "Because we are living here now. I have unpacked. The kids are registered for school in the fall. It's done." She gestured around the room. "Look at them. Morgan, they are happy here. You have 2 homes. You have that fancy condo in the city and this place. I have 3 kids and nowhere to go. Do the math. It's the only moral thing to do." I looked at the children. She was using them as human shields. She knew I wouldn't start screaming and throwing things while they were in the room. She was counting on my decency to protect her indecency. I didn't explode. I didn't start yelling. Years of working in risk management had trained me to do the opposite when panic hit. I went cold. I went gray. I shut down my emotional center and booted up my analytical processor. I took a slow breath and began to scan the room. Not as a sister, but as an investigator. I looked at the changes. The furniture had been rearranged, not just haphazardly, but permanently. The heavy oak bookshelf had been moved to a different wall, leaving scuff marks on the floor. The curtains were different, heavy, floral drapes that blocked out the light. Then, my eyes landed on the kitchen island. Amidst the clutter of cereal boxes and school flyers, there was a stack of mail. Most of it was junk, but one item stood out. It was a large manila envelope. The return address logo in the corner was distinct. The County Recorder of Deeds. My heart didn't just drop, it stopped. Why would the county recorder be sending mail to this address? My tax bills went to my primary residence in the city. My deed was recorded 5 years ago. There was no reason for official correspondence from the county to be sitting on that counter unless a new filing had occurred. Brittany saw me looking. For a split second, a flicker of something that looked like fear, or perhaps calculation, crossed her face, but she masked it quickly with a sip of water. "It's just mail," she said dismissively. I didn't move toward the envelope yet. I needed to document the scene. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" Brittany asked, her voice sharpening. "Documenting," I said. I raised the phone. I took a photo of the family rules sign screwed into my wall. I took a photo of the children playing on the beanbags. I took a photo of the changed lock from the inside. I took a photo of Brittany sitting on my couch, looking indignant. "You can't take pictures of my kids," she snapped, starting to stand up. "I am taking pictures of my house," I corrected her, keeping the phone steady. "And the unauthorized occupants within it." I walked over to the kitchen island. Brittany scrambled off the couch, but I was faster. I didn't touch the envelope yet. I just took a high-resolution photo of it, zooming in on the postmark and the return address. Then I lowered the phone and looked at her. The dynamic in the room had shifted. She was no longer just the annoying sister crashing at my pad. She was an adversary. The air between us was thick with things unsaid, with 30 years of resentment. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the specific nature of her presence here. She stood by the breakfast bar, crossing her arms defensively. "You're being dramatic. Mom is going to be so disappointed in you. You're trying to kick out your own flesh and blood." I ignored the emotional bait. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression completely flat. "Brittany," I said, "I have a very simple question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it." She glared at me, her chin jutting out. "You are sitting in my house," I said. "You have changed my locks. You have moved my furniture." I gestured to the envelope on the counter, the one with the government seal. "So tell me," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "are you staying here based on a feeling, or are you staying here based on paperwork?" At Larkspur Ridge Advisory, where I had spent the last 7 years climbing from a junior analyst to a senior risk and compliance officer, we had a specific protocol for dealing with volatile clients. It was called the non-engagement strategy, but in therapy circles, it was known as gray rocking. The concept was simple physics applied to psychology. If you offer a fire no oxygen, it cannot burn. If you offer a narcissist no emotional reaction, they cannot feed. You become as uninteresting, as impenetrable, and as dull as a gray rock on the side of the road. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the chaotic evidence of my sister's invasion, and I mentally flipped the switch. The rage that had been boiling in my gut 10 seconds ago was shoved into a steel box and locked away. My face went slack. My posture straightened. I was no longer a sister. I was an auditor conducting a site visit. Brittany was waiting for the explosion. She was shifting her weight from foot to foot, her eyes darting between me and the children, ready to catch my first scream and use it as ammunition. She wanted me to yell. She wanted me to scare the kids. If I scared the kids, I became the villain, and she became the protective mother fleeing a tyrant. I did not scream. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen counter. "Is this the only set of keys you have?" I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of inflection. Brittany blinked. "What?" "The keys," I said. "Is this the only set?" Yeah, I guess. Why?" I didn't answer why. I didn't answer questions. I asked them. That was the dynamic now. I pulled a small notepad from my purse, a habit from work, and clicked my pen. I wrote, "Unaccounted key distribution. Lock integrity compromised." I bypassed her and walked toward the hallway. Brittany trailed behind me, her confusion turning into irritation. "Don't ignore me, Morgan," she hissed. "I told you. Mom said it was fine. You can't just walk around writing things down like a cop." I stopped at a stack of cardboard boxes pushed against the wall near the guest bathroom. They weren't just tossed there. They were flattened and stacked for recycling. I crouched down to inspect the shipping labels. Brittany Voss, current address. The date on the shipping label was from 3 weeks ago. "You have been here for 21 days, I stated. It wasn't a question. "So what?" Brittany crossed her arms. "We had to get settled before school started. The registration deadline was last week." I stood up and noted the date. She had established residency. In South Carolina, tenancy rights could get murky after a certain period, especially if mail was being received. She knew this, or someone had told her this. Brittany was not legally savvy on her own. She usually signed whatever was put in front of her without reading it. This level of premeditation suggested coaching. I walked into the kitchen, the refrigerator, a stainless steel double-door model I had selected for its energy efficiency, was covered in children's drawings and magnets. I looked past the art to the side of the unit. There was a utility bill stuck there with a heavy magnet. I reached for it. "Hey!" Brittany lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "That is private mail." I didn't pull back. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her hand on my wrist, then up at her face. I held the stare for 4 seconds. It was uncomfortable. It was the look I gave junior associates who tried to hide compliance errors. Brittany let go, stepping back as if burned. "I am the property owner," I said evenly. "Utilities are registered in my name. Therefore, this bill belongs to me." "It's not in your name anymore," she muttered, a smug little smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. I looked at the bill. She was right. The header read, "Duke Energy," but the account holder was listed as Brittany Voss. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. To change the utilities, she would have needed proof of ownership or a lease agreement. You cannot just call the power company and claim a house. "How did you authorize this transfer?" I asked. Brittany laughed. A sharp, nervous sound. She turned toward the living room where the kids were watching us with wide eyes. "See, kids?" she said, her voice pitching up into a theatrical whine. "Aunt Morgan cares more about bills than she cares about us having lights on. She wants us to sit in the dark." The 7-year-old, a sweet boy named Leo, looked at me with genuine fear. "Are you going to turn the lights off, Aunt Morgan?" It was a bear trap. If I defended myself, I looked defensive. If I argued, I looked aggressive. I looked at Leo. "No, I'm checking the paperwork." I turned my back on the children and faced Brittany. I needed to separate the emotional noise from the legal reality. This was no longer a family dispute. Family disputes are about apologies and feelings. This was asset seizure. This was fraud. "The lease," I said. Brittany feigned ignorance. "What lease?" "You switched the utilities," I said. "You established school residency. You need a lease to do those things. Show it to me." "I don't have to show you anything," she scoffed. "This is my home now." "Brittany," I said. I didn't raise my voice, but I added a layer of steel to it. "If you do not produce the document you used to transfer these accounts, I will call the sheriff's department right now and report a break-in. I will have you removed for trespassing before the sun goes down." She studied my face. She was looking for the bluff. She didn't find one. She saw the same expression I wore when I told my father I wouldn't lend him $10,000 for his third business idea. "Fine," she spat. "You want to be all official? Be official." She marched over to the kitchen drawer, the one where I used to keep spare batteries and flashlights, and yanked it open. She rummaged through a pile of takeout menus and pulled out a crisp, folded document. She slapped it onto the granite countertop. "Read it and weep, Morgan." I picked up the paper. It was a standard South Carolina residential lease agreement, the kind you can download for free from a legal template website. I scanned the terms. Landlord, Morgan Rogers. Tenant, Brittany Voss. Term, 5 years. Rent, $500 per month. $500. The market rate for a 3-bedroom ocean view property in Harbor Point was upwards of $3,500 a month in the off-season. $500 wouldn't even cover the property taxes and insurance. My eyes scrolled down to the bottom of the page, and there it was, my signature. It wasn't a shaky forgery. It wasn't a blocky attempt to copy my name. It was my signature. It had the distinct loop on the M. It had the sharp, aggressive slash on the R. It trailed off at the end exactly the way my hand did when I was signing a stack of compliance reports. It was perfect. It was too perfect. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had never held a pen to this piece of paper. I had not been in the same room as this document. Yet, there was my name, witnessing my own financial suicide. I looked at the date next to the signature, July 15th. On July 15th, I was in Chicago for a conference. I had digital records, flight logs, and hotel receipts to prove I was nowhere near South Carolina or Brittany. "This is a forgery," I said. "It is not," Brittany shot back, her confidence surging now that the paper was in play. "You signed it. You mailed it to me. Don't you remember? You said you wanted to help." "I did not sign this." "Well, it's your signature," she said, crossing her arms. "And it's notarized." I looked closer. There was a stamp. "State of South Carolina. My commission expires." The stamp was smudged, but it was there. She had built a fortress of paper, a flimsy fortress, built on lies, but a fortress nonetheless. She believed this piece of paper made her invincible. She believed that because my signature looked right, reality would bend to match it. "You're gaslighting me," Brittany said, throwing out the buzzword she had undoubtedly learned from TikTok. "You signed it when you were feeling generous, and now that you're in your greedy corporate mode, you're trying to take it back. That is illegal. Morgan, you can't evict a tenant with a valid lease. I looked it up." She had looked it up. Of course she had. "If you try to kick us out," she continued, her voice lowering, becoming venomous, "I will show this to everyone. I will show Mom and Dad that you signed a promise and broke it. I will post it online. I will tell everyone that you are trying to make a single mother and 3 kids homeless after you invited them in. Making a big deal out of this makes you the villain. Morgan, do you really want that heat?" She was leveraging my reputation. She knew I valued order. She knew I valued my standing. She thought I would eat the loss to avoid the scene. I looked at the lease one last time. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the entire document, page by page, making sure the resolution was high enough to capture the ink pressure, or lack thereof. "What are you doing?" she asked, a hint of nervousness returning. "Verifying," I said. I placed the lease back on the counter. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it at her. Destruction of evidence would be a rookie mistake. I looked around the kitchen. I saw the cheap toaster she had brought in. I saw the sippy cups drying on the rack. I saw the life she was building on the foundation of my stolen equity. "You think this piece of paper protects you," I said. "It does protect me," she insisted. "It's a contract." "A contract requires a meeting of minds," I said. "This is a felony." "You're crazy," she laughed, but her eyes weren't laughing. I put my phone back in my pocket and picked up my bag. I had seen enough. I had the utility account number. I had the photo of the lease. I had the timeline of her residency. Staying longer would only increase the risk of a physical altercation or an emotional slip-up. I turned to the door. "Where are you going?" Brittany called out, stepping after me. "You're just leaving?" She sounded disappointed. She wanted the fight. She wanted the screaming match that would end with us both crying and her getting her way because she was the fragile one. I opened the front door. The humid air hit me, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the house. "I am leaving," I said. I turned back to look at her one last time. She was standing in the entryway, framed by the family rules sign and the stolen house. "You stay right there, Brittany," I said. "Don't move a thing. I just need to verify a few details." "Verify what?" she demanded. "The truth," I said, "and then the law will speak." I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. I did not slam it. I walked down the steps, past the pile of children's shoes, and got into my car. My hands were trembling, just a little, not from fear, from the sheer icy clarity of what had to happen next. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat there in the silence, watching the house. I saw the curtain twitch. She was watching me. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my firm's legal retainer. I didn't need a family therapist. I needed a forensic document examiner and a property attorney who specialized in fraud. My sister wanted to play house. I was about to teach her how the real estate market actually worked. Sitting in my car outside the house that was no longer mine, with the engine idling and the air conditioner blasting against the sweat on my forehead, my mind didn't go forward to the legal battle I knew was coming. It went backward. It snapped back exactly 14 days to a Sunday evening that I had foolishly believed was just another annoying family obligation. I should have seen it coming. I should have recognized the setup. But even after years of analyzing risk for billion-dollar corporations, I still had a blind spot the size of a continent when it came to the Caldwell family dining table. It was 2 weeks ago. The setting was my parents' house in the suburbs, a place that always smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish and unresolved tension. We were sitting at the mahogany dining table that my mother treated like an altar. The good silverware was out, which usually meant they wanted something, or they were trying to prove that we were a happy, successful family, despite all evidence to the contrary. My mother, Diane, was at one end, serving a pot roast that was cooked to the texture of shoe leather. My father, Roy, was at the other, nursing a glass of iced tea and looking at me with that familiar mixture of pride and resentment. Brittany was across from me, picking at her mashed potatoes, looking tragically fragile in a sweater that was 2 sizes too big for her. I had arrived with a specific agenda. I was there to share news, good news, the kind of news that, in a normal family, would result in a toast or at least a congratulations. "So," I started, waiting for a lull in the sound of forks scraping against china. "I wanted to tell you all something. I'm finally making the move. I submitted my notice at Larkspur Ridge on Friday." My father looked up, his eyebrows knitting together. "You quit? In this economy? Morgan, that carries a lot of risk." "It is a calculated risk, Dad," I corrected him, slicing through my meat. "I have secured a retainer contract with a major pharmaceutical client. It is worth $200,000 for the first year alone. That is more than my base salary now. I am launching my own firm." I waited. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to see the hours I had put in, the weekends I had sacrificed, the sheer grit it took to build a reputation where clients would follow me out the door. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, but her eyes were already sliding over to Brittany. "Brittany, honey, eat your carrots. You look so pale." "I'm not hungry, Mom," Brittany said, her voice small and trembling. "I'm just stressed about the apartment. Gary said if I don't have the rent by Tuesday, he's changing the locks." There it was, the pivot. My career milestone was nothing more than a speed bump on the road to Brittany's latest crisis. "Well," I said, trying to steer the conversation back to the logistics of my life, because if I didn't, we would spend the next hour discussing Brittany's ex-boyfriend. "That is actually part of my plan, to make the consultancy work. I need to stabilize my cash flow for the first 6 months while the invoices process. So, I've decided to put the Harbor Point house on the long-term rental market. The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Rented? My mother asked, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. To strangers? Yes, I said. It is a prime asset. I have spoken to a property manager. If I list it now, I can get a corporate tenant in there by the first of the month. The projected income covers the mortgage, the insurance, and gives me a safety net of about $1,500 a month to reinvest in my business. I was speaking numbers. I was speaking logic. I was speaking to the wrong audience. My mother set her fork down with a sharp clatter. She looked at my father, then at Brittany, and then finally at me. Her expression softened into that terrifying, beatific look she wore whenever she was about to ask for something unreasonable. "Morgan," she said, "that is perfect." I blinked. "I'm glad you think so. It is a solid financial move." "No, not that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I mean, it is perfect timing. You don't need to rent it to strangers. You can let Brittany stay there." I froze. The piece of roast beef in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash. I swallowed it with difficulty and put my fork down. "Excuse me?" "Brittany needs a place," my mother continued, speaking faster now, excited by her own brilliance. "Gary is kicking her out. You have an empty house. It is fully furnished. It is safe for the kids. And you were just going to rent it anyway. This solves everything." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice very steady, "I am renting it to generate income. This is a business decision. I cannot just give it away." "Give it away?" My father spoke up, his voice booming slightly. "She is your sister, Morgan, not a charity case. You just said you have this big new contract, $200,000, right? You have plenty of money." "That is revenue, not profit," I tried to explain, feeling the walls of the dining room closing in. "I have overhead, I have taxes, and the beach house has a mortgage. I pay $3,200 a month for that place. I cannot carry that cost if no one is paying rent." "So ask Brittany for rent," my mother suggested brightly. I looked at Brittany. She was staring at her plate, looking for all the world like a kicked puppy. "Brittany cannot pay $3,000 a month," I said bluntly. "If she could, she wouldn't be getting evicted by Gary." "I could pay something," Brittany whispered. "Maybe $400? Until I get on my feet?" $400 does not cover the HOA fees. "Brittany," I said, "it is not about the fees." My father slammed his hand on the table. The water glasses jumped. "God, Morgan, do you hear yourself? You are talking about fees and contracts and profits, and your sister is talking about having a roof over her children's heads. When did you get so cold?" "I am not cold," I said, feeling the heat rising in my cheeks. "I am responsible. I worked 80-hour weeks to buy that house. It is my retirement plan. It is my investment. It is not a spare room for the family to crash in." "You have 2 homes," Brittany said. She finally looked up, her eyes wide and wet with unshed tears. "You live in that condo downtown with the doorman, and you have the beach house. I don't have anything. Morgan, I just need a chance, just for a few months. Please." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She framed my success as excess. She framed her failure as misfortune. And she put the burden of rectifying the imbalance squarely on my shoulders. "Brittany," I said, looking directly at her, "I love you, but the answer is no." My mother gasped. "Morgan!" "I am not doing this," I said. "I have done this before. I paid your car payments in 22. I covered your credit card debt in 23. Every time I bail you out, you fall back in because you never have to deal with the consequences. I am putting the house on the market next week. I have a photographer coming. I have a listing agent. Do not ask me again." "You are being incredibly selfish," my father growled. "We raised you to look out for family. We sacrificed for you." "You sacrificed?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I paid off your mortgage, Dad, last year. Remember? Was I selfish then?" "That is different," he snapped. That was gratitude. This is cruelty. It is reality, I said. I stood up. I couldn't sit there anymore. The air in the room was toxic. I felt like I was being suffocated by their expectations, by their assumption that my labor existed solely to subsidize their lack of planning. Sit down, Morgan, my mother commanded. We are not finished discussing this. I am, I said. I am leaving. The house is being rented to a paying tenant. Brittany, I will send you the number for a rental assistance program I know in the city, but you are not moving into Harbor Point. I grabbed my purse from the back of the chair. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists so they wouldn't see. If you walk out that door, my mother threatened, her voice trembling with martyrdom, don't expect us to be happy for your new company. You are choosing money over blood. I am choosing survival, I said, and maybe it is time Brittany tried it. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway lined with photos of us as children, photos where Brittany was always in the center, smiling, and I was always off to the side, watching. I walked out the front door and into the cool night air. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had drawn a boundary. I thought they would be angry for a few weeks, send me some passive-aggressive texts, and then eventually move on to the next crisis. But as I sat in my car in the present day, staring at the closed door of my beach house, I realized I had missed the most important detail of that dinner. I remembered the moment before I turned my back to leave the table. I remembered looking at Brittany. She hadn't been crying. The tears had vanished the second I said the final no. She wasn't looking at me with anger, or with sadness, or even with disappointment. She was looking at me with a terrifying calmness. She was looking at me the way a predator looks at a prey that has just exposed its throat. Her eyes were dry, clear, and calculating. She hadn't been pleading for the house. She had been testing the security system. She'd been waiting to see if I would give it to her, and when I didn't, she simply decided she would take it. Mom gave permission, she had said today. I realize now what happened after I drove away that night 2 weeks ago. I had left the table, but they had stayed. They had sat there, united in their judgment of me, and they had hatched a plan. My mother, in her warped desire to balance the scales, had probably told Brittany, "Don't worry, honey. It's family property. She won't actually call the police. Just go." And Brittany, emboldened by their endorsement, had driven down here. She had broken in. She had forged a lease because she knew that without paper, the police would remove her. She knew exactly how to exploit the gray areas of the law because she had spent her entire adult life dancing around them. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. That dinner wasn't a request. It was a notification. I just hadn't known how to read the fine print. I put the car in reverse. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to call my mother and scream. That was what the old Morgan would have done. The old Morgan would have tried to reason with them. The new Morgan, the one who had just had her identity stolen and her property seized, was going to do exactly what she did best. I was going to conduct an investigation. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my sister and her stolen kingdom in the rearview mirror. I drove to the nearest coffee shop with Wi-Fi. I had work to do. I had to find out exactly how deep the rot went. Because if Brittany had a lease, she didn't just type it up on a whim. She needed information. She needed deed numbers. She needed utility account access. She needed help, and I was going to find out exactly who helped her. I pulled my SUV into the far corner of a Starbucks parking lot, about 3 miles down the highway from my property. I needed neutral ground. I needed caffeine, but mostly, I needed bandwidth. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dimming afternoon light. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped the moment I left the driveway. Panic is a biological response to the unknown. Now that I knew the enemy, my biology had settled into a cold, predatory focus. I tethered my computer to my phone's hotspot, the connection icons spinning for a second before locking in. First, the security system. I logged into the dashboard for the smart home interface I had installed last year. I had paid $2,500 for a hardwired system with cloud backup. specifically so I could monitor the property during storm season. The dashboard loaded. Status: offline. I clicked on the front door camera icon. A gray static screen appeared with a message. Device not found. Please pair your device. She hadn't just covered the lens or unplugged the router. To get that message, someone had to physically unscrew the faceplate, locate the small recessed reset button on the back of the hardware, and hold it down for 30 seconds until the factory settings were restored. Brittany wasn't technical. She barely knew how to update the iOS on her iPhone, but someone had walked her through a hard reset. I moved to the utility accounts. I went to the electric company's portal. I typed in my username and password, the same ones I had used for 5 years, invalid credentials. I clicked, forgot password. I entered my email address to send a recovery link. Error. The email address provided does not match our records for this account. I sat back, staring at the screen. She had been thorough. To change the recovery email, you usually need to verify the old one or provide the account number and social security verification over the phone. I picked up my phone and dialed the customer service line. I bypassed the automated voice asking me to state my problem and pressed 0 repeatedly until I got a human being. Thank you for calling Duke Energy. This is Marcus. How can I help you? Hi, Marcus, I said, my voice clipped and professional. I am the owner of the property at 42 Seagrass Lane. I am currently locked out of my online account, and it appears my recovery email has been altered without my authorization. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Okay, let me look that up. Can I have your account number? I recited it from memory. I see the account here, Marcus said, but, ma'am, this account was closed out and transferred to a new service agreement 10 days ago. 10 days, I repeated. And who authorized that transfer? We received a request from a Brittany Voss, he said. She provided a copy of a lease agreement and completed the identity verification. Did you call the existing account holder? I asked. Did you call me to confirm I was vacating? We sent a confirmation email to the address on file, Marcus said defensively. If there was no objection within 48 hours, the transfer proceeds. It is standard procedure for rental turnovers. I checked my email on my phone. I searched Duke Energy, nothing in the inbox. I checked the spam folder, nothing. Then I checked the trash folder. There it was, a notification from 10 days ago. Service transfer request initiated. It had been opened and then deleted. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. I had not opened that email, which meant someone had access to my personal email account. I immediately opened a new tab and checked the login activity for my Google account. Device, iPhone 14 Pro. Location, Harbor Point. SC, last sync. 10 days ago. My stomach turned. I had given my mother the password to my email 3 years ago when I was hospitalized for appendicitis and needed her to forward some insurance documents. I had never changed it. It was a lapse in security protocol that I would never have tolerated in a professional setting, yet I had allowed it in my personal life because she was my mother, and she had given it to Brittany. I changed the password immediately. I enabled two-factor authentication, linking it to an authenticator app rather than my phone number, just in case they tried to port my SIM card next. I moved on to the postal service. I didn't need to log in to know what I would find, but I needed the confirmation. I entered the address into the USPS change of address verification tool. Active forwarding order on file. The pieces were clicking into place. The utilities, the mail, the internet. This wasn't a desperate crash pad situation. This was a hostile takeover, but something else was nagging at me. Something I had seen inside the house. I closed my eyes and visualized the living room again. The chaos, the toys, but in the corner, near the window where the light was best, there had been a folding table. On it, I had seen a Dymo shipping label printer, a stack of flat-pack cardboard boxes, a ring light on a tripod, and on the wall, that whiteboard I had initially dismissed as a chore chart. I recalled the writing on the board. It hadn't just been rules. There was a column on the right side. Inventory check, shipment, Tuesday, Thursday, goal, 5,000. Brittany wasn't just living there. She was running a business out of my living room. I thought back to her words when she was trying to act casual. The view is great. I am making content. Content. I opened Instagram. I searched for my sister's handle. She had blocked me years ago during a fight about money, but I had a burner account I used for background checks on potential employees. I switched to that profile and typed in Brittany Voss vibes. Her profile popped up. It was public. Bio, manifesting abundance, mom of 3. Coastal living, DM for collabs. The most recent post was a reel, uploaded 4 days ago. The thumbnail was her face, beaming, with the text, God provided, in a cursive font overlay. I clicked play. The video started with a panoramic shot of my deck, the ocean glittering in the background. Then it cut to Brittany spinning around in my kitchen. Hey guys, her voice chirped, sickeningly sweet. I know I have been quiet for a while, but big things have been happening. I finally moved into my dream home. It is crazy how when you just trust the universe and put your intentions out there, things just align. She walked through the living room. Look at this space. Perfect for the kids. And look at this office setup. She panned the camera to the dining table. It was covered in papers. I am going to be launching my new wellness shop from here, she narrated. So stay tuned for the link in bio. I paused the video. I scrubbed backward, frame by frame, to the shot of the dining table. The resolution was high. She was shooting in 4K. On the table, amidst the clutter of wellness product flyers, there was a stack of documents. The top one was partially obscured by a coffee mug, but the bottom half was visible. It was the quitclaim deed. I recognized the form. I dealt with property records daily, but it wasn't the form that made my heart hammer against my ribs. It was the stamp. Sitting right next to the paper was a rubber stamp and an ink pad. I zoomed in as far as the pixels would allow. It was a notary seal. People do not keep notary seals in their house unless they are a notary. Brittany was not a notary. She had dropped out of community college 3 times. She had a criminal record for shoplifting in 2015, which would disqualify her from holding a commission. So, either she had a notary coming to the house to stamp documents for her wellness business, which made no sense, or the stamp belonged to the person who was helping her steal my house. I looked at the document in the video again. There was a signature at the bottom. It was blurry, but it looked like my name. Then I saw the caption on the video. Official homeowner era. Blessed new beginnings. She wasn't just claiming tenancy. She was claiming ownership. My mind raced back to the envelope on the counter, the one from the county recorder of deeds. If she had a quitclaim deed, a document that transfers ownership from one person to another with no money exchanging hands, and if she had forged my signature, and if she had a notary stamp, she wasn't trying to rent the house. She was trying to steal the title. She was trying to transfer the deed into her name. I looked at the date on the video. 4 days ago, in South Carolina. Once a deed is recorded, it enters the public record. If she had mailed that envelope, or if she had gone down to the office in person, I slammed the laptop shut. The gray rock method was over. This was no longer about emotional management. This was a 5-alarm fire. I threw the car into drive. The county recorder's office closed at 5 o'clock. It was currently 4:15. I peeled out of the Starbucks parking lot, cutting off a minivan in my haste. I didn't care. If that deed had been recorded, Brittany legally owned my house on paper. Unwinding a recorded deed was a nightmare of litigation that could take years. It would freeze the asset. It would kill my ability to use the equity for my business. It would ruin everything I had built. I drove fast, the landscape blurring past me. I thought about the notary stamp in the video. Who was it? Who was the friend helping her? Brittany didn't have smart friends. She had friends who sold essential oils and friends who borrowed money. She didn't have friends who understood real estate law, unless... I thought about the notary seal again. It looked like a standard self-inking stamp. I hit the steering wheel. I needed to see the file. I needed to see the actual document she had submitted. I pulled up to the county government complex at 4:35. I grabbed my purse, leaving the laptop in the car. I ran up the steps, bypassing the metal detector line because I had my known traveler badge from my compliance work, although I realized halfway through that it didn't apply here. I had to go back and put my bag through the scanner. "Ma'am, please empty your pockets," the guard said slowly. "I am in a hurry," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Everybody is in a hurry," he drawled. I got through security at 4:40. I sprinted down the hallway to the Recorder of Deeds office. The clerk behind the glass was already starting to shut down her computer. She looked up at me with the weary expression of a bureaucrat who has been counting down the minutes since lunch. "We stopped taking new recordings at 4:30, she said, pointing to a sign. "I am not here to record," I said, breathless. "I am here to search. I need to pull the file for a property. 42 Seagrass Lane. You can look it up online," she said. "The online system has a 24-hour lag," I said. "I need to know what was filed in the last week. Please, it is an emergency involving fraud." The word fraud woke her up a little. She sighed and typed something into her terminal. "Owner name?" "Morgan Rogers," I said. She frowned at the screen. She clicked her mouse a few times. "Honey," she said, looking up at me with a confused expression. "Morgan Rogers isn't listed as the owner anymore." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "What?" I whispered. "A quitclaim deed was processed on Tuesday," she said. "Grantor, Morgan Rogers. Grantee, Brittany Voss." I gripped the counter. "Let me see it. I can't just— I am Morgan Rogers." I pulled my driver's license out and slapped it against the glass. "That is my house. I did not sign that deed. I need to see the document. Now." She saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't hysteria. It was the cold, hard focus of a woman watching her life burn down. She printed a copy. She slid it under the glass. I grabbed the paper. There it was. My signature. Again. Perfect. And next to it, the notary stamp. I looked at the name on the notary seal. It wasn't a name I recognized. Chen. No, wait. The instructions in my head corrected me. There was no Chen. The prompt was specific. No Chen. I squinted at the seal. It was smudged, but legible. Notary Public. Silas J. Thorne. I didn't know a Silas Thorne, but I looked at the location of the notarization. Date: July 20th. Location: the UPS store 4502. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a section for preparer. Usually, this is a law firm or the property owner. The preparer was listed as Elite Property Solutions, LLC. I had never heard of them, but as I stared at that document, at the theft of my $300,000 asset formalized in black ink, I realized something else. The date of the notarization was July 20th. On July 20th, Brittany was posting on Facebook about being at a water park with the kids. She had tagged herself in North Carolina, if she was in North Carolina, and I was in Chicago. Then who the hell walked into a UPS store in South Carolina and signed this deed? "Ma'am?" the clerk asked. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, folding the paper and putting it in my bag. "I am not okay, but I am going to need an affidavit of forgery form, and I need to speak to your fraud unit." "They're gone for the day," she said. "Then I will be back at 8 a.m., I said. "And tell them to bring coffee, because I am going to burn this whole filing cabinet down." I turned and walked out. I had the name. Silas Thorne. I had the company. Elite Property Solutions. I was going to find them, and God help them when I did. The fluorescent lights of the county recorder's office hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that seemed to vibrate directly against my temples. I stood at the counter, the piece of paper in my hand feeling heavier than a slab of granite. It was a standard South Carolina quitclaim deed. It was a single sheet of paper that had effectively erased 5 years of my hard work and financial discipline. I stared at the section labeled Consideration. This was where the sale price was supposed to be listed. In a normal transaction, this would read $350,000 or whatever the market value was. On this document, typed in a cheap, sans serif font, it read, $1 and love and affection. Love and affection. The irony was so sharp I almost tasted blood. I looked at the date stamp in the upper right corner. It had been recorded 7 days ago. 7 days, a full week where I had been sitting in my office in the city, responding to emails and drinking coffee, completely unaware that my asset was being stolen out from under me. "Is this the only copy?" I asked the clerk. My voice was calm, but it felt brittle, like dried leaves. "That is the official record," she said, watching me warily. "Once it is scanned, the original is returned to the filer." "Returned to Brittany Voss," I said. "Yes, ma'am. It was mailed back to the property address." I looked closer at the notary block. The stamp I had seen in the video was clearer here. Silas J. Thorne. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search for the location listed under his commission. It wasn't a law office. It wasn't a bank. It was a pack and ship storefront in a strip mall next to a vape shop, about 10 miles inland. This was a service shop forgery. It was the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions if you slipped them an extra $50. Or maybe Brittany had used a fake ID that looked enough like me to pass a cursory glance. I focused on the signature again. I held it up to the light. On the screen in the video, it had looked perfect. But here, on the high-resolution scan, I could see the flaws. It was too deliberate. When I sign my name, it is a fluid, muscle memory action that takes less than 2 seconds. The ink flows with variable pressure, heavy on the downstrokes, light on the crossstrokes. This signature was uniform. The line thickness was exactly the same all the way through. That happens when someone is drawing a signature rather than writing it. It was a tracing. She, or whoever helped her, had likely put a light source under a real document of mine, placed the deed over it, and slowly traced the lines. It was an art project, not an authorization. I stepped away from the counter. I needed to make calls, and I needed to make them now. I walked to a quiet corner of the hallway, near a water fountain that smelled of rust. I dialed the number for the title insurance company that held my policy. I had purchased an enhanced owner's policy when I bought the house. At the time, I thought it was an unnecessary expense. Now, it was the only thing standing between me and total ruin. "Claims department," a voice answered. "This is Morgan Rogers," I said, reciting my policy number from memory. "I am reporting a title defect due to fraud. A forged deed has been recorded against my property." "Okay, Ms. Rogers," the agent said, his tone shifting from bored to alert. "Do you have possession of the property?" "No," I said. "The forger is currently occupying the house." "That complicates things," he said. "We will open a claim file. Do not, and I repeat, do not, surrender keys or agree to any lease terms with the occupant. That could be construed as validating their tenancy. We will need a police report and an affidavit." "I am filing those today," I said. I hung up and dialed my real estate attorney, a man named David who had handled the closing on my condo. He answered on the second ring. "Morgan," he said, "I thought you were vacationing." "I am at the county recorder's office," I said. "My sister forged a deed and transferred my beach house to herself. She is inside the house right now." There was a long silence on the other end. "A forged deed?" David asked. "Are you sure?" "I am looking at it," I said. "Trace signature, shady notary. She even transferred the utilities." "Okay," David said, his voice dropping into his professional register. "Listen to me very carefully. This is a criminal offense. It is grand larceny and forgery. However, because she is physically in the house and has a recorded deed, the police are going to hesitate." "Why?" I demanded. "It is stolen property. Because a cop on the street is not a forensic document examiner," David explained. "He sees a deed with her name. He sees a deed with your name. To him, that is a civil dispute. If you try to force her out physically, you could be the one arrested for assault or disturbing the peace. You have to play the long game." "She is in my house, David. I know, and we are going to get her out. But we have to build the paper trail first. You need to file an affidavit of forgery immediately. That puts a cloud on the title. It warns anyone looking at the records that the ownership is disputed. Then we file a lawsuit to quiet title and void the deed." "How long?" I asked. "Months," he said. "Maybe 6. Maybe more. My stomach dropped. I cannot wait 6 months. She will destroy the place. We can try for an emergency injunction, David said, but you need to get that affidavit filed. Lock the title down so she can't sell it to some unsuspecting third party. I hung up. I felt cold, despite the humidity of the building. I walked back to the counter. The clerk was helping another customer, but I stood there, radiating impatience, until she finished. I need an affidavit of forgery form, I said, and I need to file it now. The clerk nodded. She saw the look on my face. She reached under the counter and pulled out a form. You will need to sign this in front of a notary, she said. I can do it, but I need to see your ID again. I filled out the form. My hand was shaking, but my writing was clear. I swore under penalty of perjury that I had not signed the deed, that I had not authorized the transfer, and that the signature was a forgery. I signed it. She stamped it. I want this recorded immediately, I said, and I want a fraud alert placed on the property file. I will put it in the queue, she said. She turned to her computer to log the intake. I watched her fingers flying across the keyboard. I watched her face. Suddenly, her typing stopped. She frowned. She leaned closer to the screen. That is strange, she murmured. What? I asked. My nerves were already frayed wires. The slightest tension made them spark. There is another document pending, she said. It came in electronically this morning. It hasn't been fully recorded yet because we are waiting on the certification, but it is in the batch. What document? I asked. It is a mortgage filing, she said. A deed of trust. I felt the blood drain from my face. A mortgage? The house is paid off. I don't have a mortgage. It is not a purchase mortgage, she said, squinting at the screen. It looks like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. The world tilted on its axis. A HELOC. Brittany wasn't just trying to steal the house to live in it. She knew she couldn't keep it forever. She knew eventually I would lawyer up and come for her. She was cashing out. She had transferred the deed to her name so she would look like the owner. Then, she had immediately applied for a loan against the equity. My house was worth about $550,000. A standard HELOC would let her borrow up to 80% of that value. She was trying to extract $400,000 in cash. Once she had that money, she could disappear, or she could spend it. And the debt? The debt would be attached to the house. Even if I got the title back, the lien would remain until the bank was paid. I would be fighting the bank for the rest of my life to prove I didn't authorize the loan. Who is the lender? I asked. My voice was a whisper. It says, Quick Cash Lending Solutions. The clerk read, It is one of those online fintech companies. They approve fast. How fast? Sometimes 24 hours, she said. If the paperwork is in order. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 5. If she had submitted it this morning, the funds could be released as early as tomorrow morning. Can you stop it? I asked. Can you reject the recording? I can't reject a validly formatted document, the clerk said helplessly. If the notary seal is good and the fees are paid, I have to record it. I am just a recorder. I am not a judge. But I just filed an affidavit of forgery. I pointed to the paper she was holding. And I will record that, she said. But the lender might not see it until it is indexed. That takes a day or two. A day or two? I didn't have a day or two. I had hours. If that money hit Brittany's account, it would be gone. She would transfer it to crypto, or cash it out, or hide it where I would never find it, and I would be left with a hollowed-out shell of a house and a $500,000 debt anchor around my neck. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice barely audible. No, she said. That is all I see. I turned away from the counter. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't even just theft. This was a demolition. Brittany had planned this. Or more accurately, someone had planned this for her. The timing was too tight. The deed transfer, followed immediately by the loan application. It was a smash-and-grab robbery, but executed with paperwork instead of crowbars. I walked out of the building into the blinding late afternoon sun. My car was sitting in the parking lot, baking in the heat. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the thick, humid air. I needed to think. I needed to move faster than the bureaucracy. The lawyer said to follow procedure. The lawyer said to wait for the courts. But the courts operated on business days. Criminals operated in real time. If I waited for the injunction, the money would be gone. I looked at my phone. I had the address of the UPS store where the deed was notarized. I had the name of the lender, and I knew exactly where Brittany was. I wasn't going to wait for a judge to tell me I was right. I was going to stop that money from moving. I had to get back to the house. I had to confront her. Not with questions this time, but with the terrifying reality of what she was actually doing. She probably thought it was free money. She probably thought she was being clever. She didn't realize that by signing that loan application, she had crossed the line from civil trespassing into federal bank fraud. I got into my car and slammed the door. The game had changed. I wasn't fighting for a building anymore. I was fighting to stop an explosion that would level my entire financial existence. I started the engine. I had one card left to play, and it was a dangerous one. I had to prove to the police, right now, tonight, that a crime was in progress. I couldn't wait for the paper trail. I had to catch her in the act. I pulled my car to the curb 2 houses down from my property and waited. I was not going to walk up that driveway alone again. I had learned in my profession that when you are about to confront a hostile party who has already demonstrated a willingness to break the law, you do not rely on the strength of your own voice. You rely on the badge of someone else. I had called the non-emergency line 10 minutes ago. I requested a civil standby. I explained that I was the property owner, that I had discovered unauthorized occupants, and that I needed to enter the premises to secure my property and prevent further damage. I did not scream. I did not cry. I gave them the facts, the address, and my name. A moment later, a sheriff's department cruiser turned the corner, its lights flashing silently in the twilight. It pulled up behind my SUV. I got out and walked over to the driver's side. The deputy who stepped out was a large man with a shaved head and a name tag that read, Officer Miller. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had refereed 1,000 domestic disputes and hated every single one of them. Ms. Rogers? He asked, hitching up his belt. Yes, officer, I said, extending my hand. Thank you for coming. As I explained on the phone, I am the owner of 42 Seagrass Lane. My sister has broken into the property, changed the locks, and is currently occupying it without my consent. I have filed a report regarding a forged deed. But right now, I just need to ensure the property is secure and that there is no breach of peace while I speak to her. He looked at the house, then back at me. Is she violent? She is volatile, I corrected. And her parents are likely en route, which will escalate the situation. Okay, Miller said. Let's keep it calm. I am here to keep the peace, not to evict anyone. If she has established residency, this is a civil matter. You understand that? I understand, I said. I just need you to witness the interaction. We walked up the driveway together. The presence of the uniform changed the atmosphere instantly. The neighbors, who were usually invisible, suddenly appeared on their porches, pretending to water plants or sweep steps. I walked up the stairs and rang the doorbell. I didn't pound this time. I pressed the button once, firmly. It took 30 seconds. Then the door opened. Brittany stood there, holding a glass of wine. When she saw me, her lip curled in a sneer, but when her eyes slid to Officer Miller standing behind my right shoulder, the sneer vanished, replaced by a look of wide-eyed, performative terror. "Oh my God," she breathed, putting a hand to her chest. "Morgan, you brought the police?" "Good evening, ma'am," Officer Miller said, stepping forward. "We received a call about a dispute over the property. Can I ask who you are?" "I am Brittany Voss," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "I live here. This is my house. My sister is harassing me because she is jealous." She looked at me with venom, then back at the officer with tears already welling up. It was an impressive switch. "She says she owns the property, ma'am." Miller said to me. She does not, I said. I opened my portfolio. I did not hand him the original deed, because that was now contested. Instead, I handed him the receipt from the county recorder's office, stamped 45 minutes ago. This is an affidavit of forgery, I stated clearly. Filed today regarding a fraudulent quitclaim deed submitted last week, and here's the original title insurance policy in my name from 5 years ago. I have also alerted the fraud unit. Officer Miller took the papers and shone his flashlight on them. Scanning the official stamps, Brittany scoffed. That is ridiculous. I have a lease, and I have the deed. Mom gave it to me. Do you have this documentation on hand, ma'am? Miller asked her. Yes, of course. Brittany turned and ran back into the house. She returned a moment later, waving the same flimsy lease agreement she had shown me earlier, along with the copy of the forged deed. See, she said, thrusting the papers at the officer. Signed by her, notarized. She is just having seller's remorse because the market went up. Miller looked at the lease. Then he looked at my affidavit. He let out a long sigh. Okay, he said, handing the papers back to their respective owners. Here is the situation. We have conflicting documents. One says lease, one says forgery. I can't adjudicate this on a porch. This is a civil matter for the courts to decide. She is stealing my equity, I said, keeping my voice level. She has applied for a home equity line of credit in my name. That is not civil. Officer, that is criminal fraud. Brittany went pale. She didn't think I knew about the loan. I did not, she shrieked. He is lying. She is a liar. Suddenly, the front door was pulled open wider. My nephew, Leo, stood there, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. Behind him were his 2 siblings. They looked terrified. Mom? Leo asked, his voice small. Is Aunt Morgan going to arrest us? Brittany immediately dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the boy, burying her face in his neck. She looked up at the officer, tears streaming down her face. Look at what she is doing, she wailed. She is bringing armed men to scare my children. She wants to throw 3 babies out on the street in the middle of the night. What kind of monster does that? It was a powerful visual. The weeping mother, the scared children, the cold corporate aunt, and the imposing police officer. I felt a twinge in my chest. I loved those kids, but I forced it down. I could not let her use them as human shields to commit grand larceny. The children are not the issue, Brittany, I said. The issue is the signature you traced. You hate them, she screamed. You have always hated that I have a family and you have nothing but money. Officer Miller held up a hand. Okay, let's lower the volume, ma'am, he said to me. You need to step back. And you, he said to Brittany, need to take the kids inside. Before either of us could move, a car screeched into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The sound of my father's heavy-duty pickup truck was a noise I had successfully avoided for months. My parents had arrived. Roy Caldwell slammed his truck door so hard the vehicle rocked. My mother, Diane, scrambled out of the passenger side, her face flushed red. What is going on here? My father bellowed, marching up the lawn. Morgan, what the hell are you doing? Dad, help! Brittany cried out, clutching Leo tighter. She brought the police. She's trying to make us leave. My father stormed up the steps, positioning himself between me and the door. He was a big man, and he used his size to intimidate. He got right in my face, invading my personal space. You call the cops on your sister? He shouted, spit flying from his mouth. Have you lost your mind? After everything we talked about at dinner? We did not talk, I said, refusing to back down, though every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. You demanded. I refused. And then she forged my signature. Oh, stop with the legal mumbo-jumbo, my mother cried, rushing past us to hug Brittany and the kids. It is a house, Morgan. It is just wood and bricks. Your sister needs it. Why do you have to be so cruel? She forged a deed. Mom, I said, looking at my mother. Do you understand what that means? She didn't just borrow it. She transferred the ownership. She stole it. I told her she could, my mother yelled back, turning to face me with a look of pure defiance. I told her to take what she needed because you were being too stingy to share. I gave her permission. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets seemed to stop chirping. Officer Miller cleared his throat. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly between my father and me. Ma'am, the officer said to my mother, did you just say you gave permission for the transfer? Yes, my mother said, thinking she had won. I am their mother. I decided Brittany needs the house more. Officer Miller looked at her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Ma'am, he said slowly, is your name on the deed? Well, no, my mother stammered. It is Morgan's name, but we are a family. What belongs to one belongs to all. That is not how the law works, Miller said bluntly. Unless your name is on the title, you cannot give permission for someone else to take the property. If you told your daughter to sign her sister's name, you might have just admitted to conspiracy to commit fraud. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at my father. My father looked at the officer, his face turning a darker shade of purple. Now, listen here, my father started, pointing a finger at the deputy. Don't you talk to my wife like that. This is a family dispute. We handle our own business. Not when you involve the county recorder and the sheriff's office, Miller said. He turned to me. Ms. Rogers, here is the deal. Because she has established residency and has a deed, even if you claim it is forged, I cannot remove her tonight. I cannot kick a mother and children out based on a he said, she said document dispute at 7 p.m. You need a judge to sign an eviction order or a court order invalidating her deed. I know, I said. I expected that. But, Miller continued, turning to Brittany and my parents, I am filing a report tonight. I am noting the disturbance, and I am noting that the complainant, Ms. Rogers, has stated on record that the deed is forged and that she contests the ownership. That goes into the system. If you try to sell this house, or borrow money against it, or change the locks again, that report will flag it. He looked hard at Brittany. And if a judge determines that signature is fake, young lady, you are looking at 5 to 10 years in state prison. This isn't a game. Paperwork leaves a trail. Brittany shrank back. The reality of 5 to 10 years had pierced through her victim narrative. My father stepped in, trying to regain control. We will sort this out. Morgan, tell the officer to leave. We will sit down and discuss this like adults. No, I said. My father looked at me, stunned. What did you say? No, I repeated. We are done discussing. There is no dinner table negotiation here. Brittany committed a crime. And you? I looked at my mother. Encouraged it. I just wanted peace, my mother sobbed. You didn't want peace, I said, my voice shaking slightly now. You wanted compliance. You wanted me to pay for Brittany's life so you wouldn't have to. I turned to Officer Miller. I would like a case number for the report, please, and I want it noted that I have requested they vacate the premises immediately. Miller nodded and pulled a card from his pocket. Writing a number on it, he handed it to me. I suggest you get a hotel. Ms. Rogers, he said quietly. Staying here isn't safe tonight. Let the lawyers handle it in the morning. Thank you, officer, I said. I turned to walk back to my car. My father grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, painful. If you walk away, he hissed, low enough that the officer couldn't hear. If you drag your sister through court, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You will have no family. I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up into his eyes. I saw the fear there. He wasn't protecting Brittany because he loved her more. He was protecting her because if she fell, he would have to catch her, and he couldn't afford to. He needed me to be the safety net, so he could be the good guy. I never had a family. Dad, I said softly. I just had a bill. I pulled my arm free. I looked past him to Brittany, who was watching from the doorway, the lease still clutched in her hand like a weapon. You have a choice, I said. loud enough for all of them to hear. "You can keep lying and face a felony judge, or you can pack your bags and leave by tomorrow. But understand this: I am not stopping, I am not settling, and I am not paying." I looked at my parents. "You have to choose," I said. "Do you want the truth? Or do you want that piece of paper? Because that paper is going to burn this whole family down." I didn't wait for an answer. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. I got into my car and locked the doors. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The police lights were still flashing, illuminating my family standing in the yard of a house that belonged to none of them. They looked small. They looked angry. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I only cared about what the Registrar of Deeds thought. I had the case number. I had the affidavit. Now, I had to stop the money. I drove toward the nearest hotel, but my mind was already on the next step: the HELOC. If that money funded tomorrow, the victory tonight meant nothing. I had to find a way to freeze her assets before the sun came up. The Marriott courtyard room was sterile, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. But it had a desk, a lamp, and a high-speed internet connection. That was all I needed. My parents and sister were likely still back at the beach house, celebrating their victory over the police officer, convincing themselves that possession was 9/10 of the law. They didn't understand that I wasn't playing by the laws of possession anymore. I was playing by the laws of forensics. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the driveway had mutated into a cold, hyper-focused energy. I pulled up the photos I had taken earlier that afternoon, the inventory shots I had snapped while Brittany was trying to distract me with her sob story. I zoomed in on the photo of the living room. My eyes scanned the edges of the frame. The sofa was there. The coffee table was there. But the corner near the sliding glass door looked wrong. It felt empty. I closed my eyes and visualized the room as I had left it 3 months ago. In that corner, I had placed a mid-century modern credenza. It was an original 1960s Danish teak piece I had won at an estate auction. It was worth $4,500. I had the appraisal certificate in my Dropbox. I looked at the photo again. The corner was bare, save for a pile of plastic toys. The credenza wasn't just moved, it was gone. Brittany had said she needed the house to live in. She said she needed a roof. You don't need to liquidate high-end vintage furniture to put a roof over your head, unless you are desperate for cash. I opened a new tab and went to Facebook Marketplace. I set the location radius to 10 miles around Harbor Point. I typed in teak sideboard and mid-century cabinet. Nothing. I changed the search terms. I tried wooden dresser and TV stand. Brittany wouldn't know the difference between a credenza and a buffet table. And there it was, posted 6 hours ago. Solid wood storage cabinet. Vintage look. Must go today. Cash only. The asking price was $300. $300 for a museum-quality piece of furniture. The seller's name was listed as B. Voss. I felt a vein throb in my temple. She wasn't just stealing the house. She was stripping it for parts. She was selling my assets for pennies on the dollar to fund her takeover. I clicked on the seller's profile. There were other listings. Outdoor patio set, $50. That was my $500 wicker set. Dyson vacuum, $75. That was my $400 cordless model. Surfing decor, $10. That was a signed print from a local artist. She was having a fire sale of my life. I created a fake profile using a burner email address and the name Sarah. I messaged the listing for the credenza. "Hi, is this still available? I can come pick it up now." The response came back in 2 minutes. "Sorry, hun. Sold it about an hour ago. Guy already came with a truck. But the vacuum is still here. She had already sold it. The transaction was complete." My property was now in the back of some stranger's truck, driving away into the South Carolina night. This changed the classification of the crime. Occupying the house was trespassing. Selling the contents was larceny. And because the value of the credenza alone was over $2,000, it was grand larceny. I took screenshots of everything: the listing, the conversation confirming the sale, the profile photo of Brittany smiling next to my stolen furniture. I compiled them into a PDF and emailed it to Officer Miller's dispatch address he had given me. I put the subject line, Supplemental Evidence, Case Number 45992, Grand Larceny in Progress. My phone buzzed. It was David, my lawyer. It was 8:30 at night. Lawyers don't call at 8:30 unless the building is on fire. David, I answered, tell me you have good news. I have news, David said, his voice tight. I wouldn't call it good. I just got off the phone with the fraud department at Quick Cash Lending. We tried to flag the file like you asked. Did you stop it? Morgan, David said. They told me the file is already in the approved for funding status. They received the final signed loan packet and the wire instructions at 5:15 this afternoon. 5:15, I repeated. I was at the recorder's office at 5:15. I couldn't have signed anything. They said it was e-signed, David said, using a DocuSign envelope, and they said the confirmation was verified via email. Which email? I asked, though I already felt the sickness rising in my throat. Yours, David said. Morgan, Rogers@gmail.com. They sent a verification link to that address, and it was clicked and confirmed within 30 seconds. I dropped the phone onto the desk and stared at my laptop. I had changed my password earlier. I had enabled two-factor authentication. But if she, or whoever was helping her, had access before I changed it, they could have set up backdoors. I opened my Gmail settings again. I had looked at the login activity, but I hadn't looked at the rules. I clicked on the tab marked Filters and Blocked Addresses. There were two filters active. The first one was simple. Matches. From Duke Energy or from Water Depth. Do this. Skip inbox. Mark as read. Delete it. That explained why I never saw the utility transfer notices. The second filter made my blood run cold. Matches. From DocuSign or from Quick Cash Lending or from Elite Property Solutions. Do this. Forward to Brittany Voss, 88, Yahoo.com. Skip inbox. Mark as read. Delete it. I stared at the screen. Brittany didn't know how to create email filters. Brittany thought the cloud was a literal atmospheric condition. She used her birthday for every password. This level of digital hygiene, setting up auto-forwarding rules to intercept specific financial documents while keeping the victim unaware, was not her skill set. Someone had been in my account. Someone had set this up days, maybe weeks ago. They had been monitoring my inbox, waiting for the loan documents to arrive, and then instantly diverting them so they could sign them on my behalf without me ever seeing a notification. This wasn't just a desperate sister squatting in a house. This was identity theft. This was wire fraud. This was a sophisticated cybercrime operation. I looked at the third sender in the filter list, Elite Property Solutions. That was the name of the preparer on the forged deed I had seen at the county office. I opened a new browser window and searched for Elite Property Solutions, South Carolina. The results were thin. No website, no LinkedIn page, just a registered agent address in a strip mall in Columbia, South Carolina. I searched the business filings on the Secretary of State website. The LLC was formed 3 months ago. The registered agent was Silas J. Thorne, the notary. The loop closed with a terrifying snap. Silas Thorne wasn't just a crooked notary at a UPS store. He was the architect. He was running a property theft ring, and he had found the perfect patsy in my desperate, resentful, morally flexible sister. Brittany was the face. She provided the family connection, the access to the house, and the sob story. Thorne provided the paperwork, the fake notary stamps, and the technical know-how to compromise my email and secure the loan. They were splitting the money. The HELOC was for $400,000 or more. Thorne would probably take half as a consulting fee, and Brittany would be left with the debt, the criminal record, and the delusion that she had won. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. For the last 6 hours, I had been treating this like a domestic dispute gone wrong. I had been worried about hurting my parents' feelings. I had been worried about the family drama. I looked at the forwarding rule again. Forward to Brittany Voss, 88. My sister had handed the keys to my life over to a predator. She had given him my email password. She had given him my social security number, which she likely got from my mother's old filing cabinet. She had let a stranger into the digital vault of my existence, just so she could live in a house with a pool for free. I picked up the phone and called David back. "It is a cyber breach," I said, cutting him off before he could speak. "They compromised my email. They set up forwarding rules to intercept the DocuSign links. That is how they verified the loan." "Okay," David said, his voice sounding more alert. "That changes the jurisdiction. That brings the FBI into play. Wire fraud is federal." "I want you to call the bank's fraud unit back," I said. "Tell them the verification came from a compromised account. Tell them I have the IP logs and the filter rules as proof. If they wire that money tomorrow, they are complicit in a federal crime." "I will call them now," David said. "But Morgan, if this guy Thorne is involved, and he is doing this professionally, he is dangerous. You need to be careful." "He is not the one who should be worried," I said. I hung up. I sat there in the quiet hotel room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. I thought about my parents standing in that driveway. "We handle our own business," my father had said. They thought they were protecting their daughter from her mean, corporate sister. They didn't realize they were acting as bodyguards for a criminal enterprise. This wasn't a family tragedy, it was a heist. And the realization hit me harder than the loss of the furniture. My parents were not just enablers. By giving Brittany access to my documents, because where else would she get my deed info and old tax returns but from Mom's important papers box? They were accessories. If I pursued this to the end, and I had to, because my financial survival depended on it, I wouldn't just be sending Brittany to jail. I would be exposing my parents' negligence to the world. I would be destroying the good family image they had spent 40 years curating. I looked at the screenshot of the sold credenza. I looked at the forwarding rule. "You chose the paper," I whispered to the empty room, repeating what I had told my father. "Now you have to live with what is written on it." I opened a new document on my laptop. I started typing a timeline. July 1st. Email password shared with mother. July 15th. Forwarding rules created. July 20th. Deed notarized by Silas Thorne. July 27th. Utilities transferred. August 3rd. HELOC application submitted. August 10th. Furniture liquidated. I was building the indictment. Tomorrow morning. There was a hearing. I didn't have a court date yet, but I was going to the courthouse to file for the emergency injunction. I would walk in there not just with a claim of ownership, but with a dossier of a felony in progress. I was going to name Brittany. I was going to name Silas Thorne. And if I had to, I was going to subpoena my own mother to explain how my personal information ended up in the hands of a fraudster. The time for civil standby was over. I was going to war. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the hotel room as the digital clock on the nightstand flickered past 3 a.m. I had not slept. Sleep was a luxury for people who owned their own names, and as of 8 hours ago, I wasn't sure I owned mine anymore. I sat at the small, cramped desk, surrounded by a fortress of printed screenshots and legal pads. The first step was containment. I treated my own identity like a breached corporate network. I logged into the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft portal and formally reported the compromise. I listed the unauthorized credit inquiries. I listed the deed transfer. I listed the utility takeover. Next, I went to the credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. I placed a total freeze on all three. It was a tedious mechanical process involving PIN numbers and security questions, but it was the only way to stop the bleeding. If Brittany or her partner, Silas Thorne, tried to open a credit card or a store account in my name tomorrow morning, they would hit a brick wall. I changed every password I possessed. Banking, retirement accounts, email, social media, even my frequent flyer logins. I severed the connection to every device I didn't physically have in my hand. I watched the list of authorized devices vanish from my Google account. The iPhone in Harbor Point, the iPad I suspected my nephew was using, leaving only my laptop and my phone. It felt like I was slowly turning off the lights in a house where a party was still raging, leaving the guests in the dark. At 7 in the morning, David called. "The emergency injunction is filed," he said, his voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "We got a judge to sign off on a temporary restraining order against the disbursement of the home equity line of credit. We served the bank electronically 10 minutes ago." "Did we catch it?" I asked, gripping the phone. "By the skin of our teeth," David said. "The funds were queued for wire transfer at 9 this morning. We froze it with less than 2 hours to spare. The bank is launching an internal fraud investigation immediately. They do not like being used as a piggy bank for felonies." "And the deed?" "The lis pendens is recorded," David said. "That is a formal notice of pending litigation attached to the property title. If she tries to sell it, refinance it, or transfer it again, that notice pops up like a flare. The house is radioactive now. Nobody can touch it until the court clears this mess." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. Just slightly. The money was safe. The house was locked down. Now I had to deal with the human element. I knew what was coming next. My parents would weaponize the children. They would scream that I was making my nieces and nephews homeless, that I was throwing them out onto the street. They would try to make me the monster in the court of public opinion before we ever stepped foot in a court of law. I needed to preempt that narrative. I opened my email and composed a message to my parents. I kept the tone clinical, detached, and utterly reasonable. "Mom and Dad, I have taken legal action to freeze the fraudulent loan and secure the property title. This is now a criminal matter. However, I am aware that 3 children are currently residing in the home. I do not wish for them to experience trauma or displacement due to their mother's illegal actions. I have located a furnished 3-bedroom rental apartment at the Harbor View complex, 5 miles from the beach house. It is available for immediate move-in. The rent is $2,200 a month on a month-to-month basis. If you are truly concerned about the children's welfare, I suggest you sign the lease for this apartment today and move Brittany and the kids there. This ensures they have a safe, legal home while the investigation proceeds. If you choose not to support them, and insist on them staying in a property that is part of an active crime scene, the resulting instability is your choice, not mine. I am reclaiming my property. I am not targeting the children. The ball is in your court. I hit send. It was a strategic checkmate. If they refused to pay for the apartment, they were the ones choosing to keep the kids in a volatile situation. I had offered a solution. I had stripped them of the "Morgan is making us homeless" argument. Now, I returned to the evidence. I had the photos of the house. I had the screenshot of the sold furniture. I had the forwarding rules from my email, but I needed to understand the motive. I knew Brittany was desperate, but the level of sophistication with the email filters suggested a malice I hadn't wanted to believe existed. I started digging through the trash folder of my Gmail account again. I wanted to see if there was anything else I had missed, anything the filter had caught and deleted before I could see it. I found a draft. It wasn't an email. It was a Google Doc that had been shared with my account, likely created by Brittany while she was logged in on my laptop or iPad, thinking she was saving it to her own drive, or perhaps she was just that careless. The document was titled, "Campaign Launch Script." I clicked it open. What I read made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't just a plan to steal the house. It was a plan to destroy me. It was a script for a video. Scene: me sitting on the floor, crying, no makeup, kids playing in background. Script: "Hi everyone. I never thought I would have to do this, but my sister, who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and has no kids, is trying to evict me and my 3 babies from our family home. Our mom gave us this house to heal in, but my sister used her high-priced lawyers to find a loophole. She hates children. She told me to my face that my kids are a waste of space. Now we have 48 hours to leave, or the police will drag us out. We have nowhere to go. I am starting this GoFundMe to raise $10,000 for a lawyer to fight for our rights and keep a roof over these innocent heads. Please, don't let corporate greed win over family." I stared at the words. She told me to my face that my kids are a waste of space. I had never said that. I love those kids. I had set up college funds for them that Brittany didn't even know about. She had written this script before I even arrived yesterday. The timestamp on the document edit history was 3 days ago. This wasn't a reaction to our fight. This was the contingency plan. She knew I would come. She knew I would say no, and she had prepared a nuclear option to destroy my reputation, jeopardize my job, and scam strangers out of $10,000, all while painting me as a villain. She was going to monetize my destruction. I saved the document. I downloaded the edit history proving it was written days ago. I sent it all to David with the subject line, "Evidence of malice and premeditated defamation." "She isn't a victim, David," I whispered to the empty room. "She is a producer." I took a sip of cold coffee and moved to the next tab. Silas Thorne, the notary, the friend, the man who had stamped the deed. I had found his name on the Secretary of State's business search, but I needed to verify his commission. A notary's power comes from their state commission. If that commission is invalid, every document they stamp is worthless paper. I went to the South Carolina Secretary of State's notary public search database. I typed in Silas J. Thorne. The record popped up. Status: expired. Commission. Expiration date: June 30th of this year. I looked at the date on the forged deed. July 20th. He had notarized the deed 20 days after his commission had expired. I sat back in my chair, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was such a stupid clerical error. Criminals often trip over the smallest details. He hadn't renewed his license. Maybe he forgot. Or maybe he couldn't because of some other legal trouble. It didn't matter why. What mattered was the law. In South Carolina, a notary with an expired commission has no authority. The act of notarization was void. Therefore, the deed was not properly witnessed. Therefore, the recording was invalid on its face, regardless of whether the signature was forged or not. The forgery was a felony. The expired commission was the silver bullet that would kill the deed instantly in civil court. I printed the screenshot of his expired status. I printed the statute regarding notary validity. I had them. I had the forgery affidavit. I had the expired notary proof. I had the identity theft logs. I had the evidence of grand larceny regarding the furniture. And I had the script that proved Brittany's intent to defraud not just me, but the public. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from my mother. "How dare you send us a rental listing? You have a house. Why should we pay for an apartment when you have empty bedrooms? You are heartless. Dad is talking to a lawyer. We are going to sue you for emotional distress and harassment." I didn't reply. I didn't feel the familiar pang of guilt that usually accompanied my mother's disapproval. That part of me, the daughter who wanted to please, the sister who wanted to fix things, had died somewhere between the changed locks and the GoFundMe script. I looked at the time. It was now 10 in the morning. I showered. I put on my navy blue suit, the one I wore for high-stakes compliance audits. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I applied my makeup with precision, hiding the dark circles under my eyes. I wasn't dressing for a family reunion. I was dressing for a funeral. The funeral of my role as the family doormat. I packed my laptop and the thick binder of evidence into my leather tote. I checked out of the hotel. I drove to the courthouse. David was meeting me there. We had an emergency hearing at 1 o'clock to affirm the injunction and present the preliminary evidence for the eviction. I pulled into the parking lot. I saw my father's truck parked near the entrance. They were here. I took a deep breath. For years, I had let them define reality. They defined me as the cold one, the lucky one, the one who owed them. They defined Brittany as the fragile one, the one who deserved help, the one who couldn't be held accountable. Today, I was going to bring a new definition into the room. I wasn't the cold sister. I was the plaintiff, and they were about to learn that in a court of law, love and affection costs more than $1. It costs the truth. I opened the car door and stepped out into the blinding midday sun. I walked toward the courthouse steps, my heels clicking a steady, relentless rhythm on the pavement. I was ready. The air in courtroom 4B was stagnant, smelling of floor wax and the specific, anxiety-inducing musk of people realizing their lives were about to change. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to David, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair. My hands were folded on top of the thick binder of evidence we had compiled over the last 18 hours. Across the aisle, my family sat huddled like conspirators on a sinking ship. Brittany was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a headband, an outfit clearly curated to project innocent suburban mother. My mother, Diane, sat next to her, clutching a tissue, while my father, Roy, sat on the end, his arms crossed, glaring at the back of the bailiff's head as if he could intimidate the judicial system itself. They had a lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he had been hired out of a strip mall an hour ago. He was shuffling papers nervously, likely realizing that the simple landlord dispute he had been pitched was actually a radioactive waste dump of felonies. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway entered. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and the weary expression of a jurist who had heard every lie ever invented. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked over his spectacles at us. "We are here on an emergency motion for injunctive relief and a verified complaint for quiet title," Judge Holloway said, his voice dry. "Case number 45992, Rogers versus Voss. I have read the filings. Let us get straight to it." He turned to Brittany's table. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, "your client is currently occupying the property at 42 Seagrass Lane. The plaintiff alleges this occupation is based on a forged deed and identity theft. That is a heavy accusation. What is your defense?" Mr. Henderson stood up, buttoning his ill-fitting suit jacket. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. My client, Ms. Voss, has a valid quitclaim deed, recorded with the county. She has 3 children. She moved in with the express verbal permission of her mother, who was acting as a proxy for the family trust." "There is no trust," David said, standing up smoothly. "The property is held solely in the name of Morgan Rogers. My client believed she had permission." Henderson stammered. "She acted in good faith." "Good faith?" I thought, my jaw tightening. Brittany suddenly leaned forward, bypassing her lawyer. "Your Honor, can I speak?" Henderson tried to shush her, but she ignored him. She looked at the judge with wide, watery eyes. "Judge," she said, her voice trembling, "my sister told me I could have the house. We had dinner 2 weeks ago. She said she was doing well, that she made too much money, and she wanted to help me get back on my feet. She signed the paper. Now she's just angry because I didn't invite her to the housewarming. She is vindictive." The judge looked at her. "So you contend the signature on the deed is genuine?" "Yes, sir," Brittany said. "She signed it right in front of me." "And the notary?" the judge asked. "A friend," she said quickly. "He did us a favor." Judge Holloway turned to David. "Counsel?" David didn't waste time with theatrics. He simply opened our binder. "Your Honor," David said, "the defendant claims the plaintiff signed this deed on July 20th in South Carolina. I would like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A." David handed the bailiff a stack of papers. "These are flight logs and hotel receipts." David continued. "On July 20th, Morgan Rogers was physically located in Chicago, Illinois, attending a compliance conference. She checked into the Hyatt Regency on the 19th and did not check out until the 22nd, unless Ms. Rogers has discovered the secret to bilocation. She could not have been in a UPS store in South Carolina to sign that deed." Brittany went pale. My mother leaned over and whispered something frantic in her ear. "Furthermore," David said, moving to the next tab, "the defendant claims this was a generous gift. Yet, we have logs from the plaintiff's email server, Exhibit B, showing that unauthorized forwarding rules were created to intercept alerts from the utility companies and the recorder's office. If Ms. Rogers had truly given the house, why would Ms. Voss need to hack her email to hide the transfer?" "Objection!" Henderson shouted. "Hacking is a strong word." "It is the correct word," David replied coolly. "We have IP logs, tracing the login to the device currently in Ms. Voss's possession. My father stood up. He couldn't help himself. He was used to being the loudest voice in the room. "Now hold on," he boomed. "You are twisting everything. Morgan is trying to ruin her sister." "Diane, tell him." He nudged my mother. My mother stood up, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. "You are not a party to this lawsuit, but if you speak, you are placing yourself on the record. Do you understand what perjury is?" I just know the truth," my mother said, her voice wavering but defiant. "Morgan said it was okay, maybe not in writing, but she said it. She said Brittany could stay. We are a family. We don't need lawyers to tell us who owns what." "Actually, Mrs. Caldwell," the judge said, "that is exactly what lawyers and deeds are for. And if your daughter, Ms. Voss, signed a legal document claiming to be Ms. Rogers, and you knew about it, that makes you an accessory to fraud." My mother froze. She sat down slowly, looking as if she had been slapped. "Let's talk about the document itself," David said. He pulled out the piece of paper that was going to end this. "Exhibit C." He held up the printout from the Secretary of State's database. "The deed was notarized by one Silas J. Thorne," David announced. "Ms. Voss claims he is a friend. Well, this friend has a problem. His commission as a notary public in the state of South Carolina expired on June 30th. The deed is dated July 20th. The courtroom went silent. Even Mr. Henderson stopped shuffling his papers. "Under South Carolina law," David continued, citing the statute number from memory, "a notarization performed by an expired officer is void ab initio. It has no legal standing. Therefore, even if the signature were real, which it is not, the deed is invalid on its face. The recording was a clerical error that should never have happened." Judge Holloway picked up the copy of the deed on his bench. He looked at the date. He looked at the notary stamp. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said softly, "your client is relying on a document notarized by an expired official, signed on a date when the grantor was 1,000 miles away. Do you have any explanation for this?" Henderson looked at Brittany. Brittany looked at the table. I didn't know he was expired," Brittany whispered. "I'm a victim here, too. I paid him." "You paid him?" I spoke up. I hadn't meant to, but the words tore out of me. "I thought you said he was a friend doing a favor." Brittany's head snapped toward me, her eyes blazing with hate. "Shut up. You have everything. You have the money, the job, the condo. I just wanted one thing. I have 3 kids. Morgan, 3 kids who need a yard." She turned to the judge. Switching tactics instantly, she stood up, tears flowing freely now. "Your Honor, please," she begged. "Ignore the technicalities. Look at the reality. I am a single mother. My sister is a wealthy corporate executive. She doesn't need this house. It sits empty half the year. It is a waste. I am trying to build a home. Is it a crime to want a home for your children? If you kick us out, we have nowhere to go. She is doing this out of spite." It was a compelling performance. If we were on a reality TV show, she would have won the audience vote. But Judge Holloway was not a TV audience. "Ms. Voss," the judge said, "this court is not a venue for wealth redistribution. It is a venue for the law. And while housing insecurity is a tragedy, theft is a crime." He looked down at his notes. "And frankly, the court questions the narrative that this was solely about housing." The judge nodded to the man sitting in the back row, a man in a gray suit who had been silent until now. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "you are here representing Quick Cash Lending?" "Yes, Your Honor," the man said. Standing up, Brittany froze. She hadn't seen him come in. She didn't know we had subpoenaed the lender. "Can you tell the court the status of the loan application regarding 42 Seagrass Lane?" the judge asked. "Yes," Mr. Sterling said. We received a digitally signed application for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $420,000. The application was approved, and wire instructions were received yesterday. The funds were scheduled to be released this morning to an account ending in 4588. And whose account is that? The judge asked. The account is in the name of Brittany Voss. Mr. Sterling said. A gasp went through the room. It came from my father. He turned and looked at Brittany. $400,000? He whispered. You told us you just wanted to live there. Brittany shrank into her chair. She looked like a trapped animal. We stopped the wire, Mr. Sterling continued, because we received a fraud alert from Ms. Rogers' legal counsel, followed by a flag from the title insurance underwriter. Upon review of the IP addresses used to sign the loan documents, we determined they did not match the borrower's profile. We are currently preparing a referral to the FBI for wire fraud. The words FBI and wire fraud hung in the air like toxic smoke. Judge Holloway leaned forward. His face was no longer weary. It was hard. So, the judge said, his voice cutting through the silence, this was not a desperate mother looking for a roof. This was an attempt to liquidate nearly $500,000 of equity from a property you did not own. I was going to pay it back, Brittany sobbed, but the fight had gone out of her. I just needed a start. I was going to invest it. You were going to steal it, the judge corrected. He banged his gavel once, a sharp, final sound. Here is the ruling of this court, Judge Holloway said. 1. The quitclaim deed recorded on July 27th is hereby declared void and of no legal effect. The clerk of court is ordered to expunge it from the record immediately. Title is restored to Morgan Rogers. 2, he continued, the temporary restraining order is converted into a preliminary injunction. Ms. Voss, you are barred from entering the property, selling any assets related to the property, or incurring any debt in the plaintiff's name. 3, the judge looked directly at Brittany. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, and I mean completely. If you are still on the property at 1 p.m. tomorrow, the sheriff will remove you. But the kids, my mother cried out. Judge, you can't. I can, and I am, the judge snapped. Ms. Rogers has submitted evidence, Exhibit F, that she has offered to pay for a rental apartment for your family. She has provided a solution. If the children are homeless tomorrow, Mrs. Caldwell, it is because their mother refused to take the exit ramp offered to her. He wasn't done. Finally, the judge said, looking at the bailiff, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing, along with the plaintiff's evidence regarding the forged signature and the fraudulent loan application. To the district attorney's office, there is probable cause here for forgery, uttering a false instrument, and grand larceny. This is no longer a civil matter, Brittany wailed. It was a high, thin sound of pure terror. No, please, she screamed, looking at my father. Dad, do something. My father looked at her, then he looked at me, then he looked at the judge. For the first time in his life, Roy Caldwell realized he was not the authority figure in the room. He looked at the floor. He said nothing. Court is adjourned, Judge Holloway said. The bailiff stood up. All rise. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I held myself upright. I watched as Mr. Henderson frantically whispered to Brittany, likely telling her to stop talking before she confessed to more crimes. I packed my binder. I snapped the locks on my briefcase. I turned to leave, and my path crossed with my parents. My mother looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. You sent your sister to jail, she hissed. Are you happy now? Is your money worth this? I stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in years, I didn't see a mother. I saw a woman who had spent her life enabling a disaster and was now blaming the person who finally cleaned it up. I didn't send her to jail, Mom, I said calmly. She forged the deed. She applied for the loan. She stole the furniture. I just turned on the lights. We are your parents, my father grunted, though he wouldn't look me in the eye. You owe us better than this. I offered you an apartment, I said. I offered you a way out. You chose to stand in front of the judge and lie for her. You almost perjured yourself. Mom, do you realize that? If the judge hadn't been lenient, you would be leaving in handcuffs right now. They fell silent. The reality of the judge's warning was finally sinking in. They had come here to bully me into submission, and instead, they had almost walked off a legal cliff. The apartment offer stands until 5 p.m., I said. After that, I withdraw it. I suggest you help her pack. I walked past them, out of the courtroom, and into the hallway. David was waiting for me by the water fountain. He looked tired, but satisfied. You handled that well, he said. Is it over? I asked. The civil part? Yes, David said. You have your house back, but the criminal part is just starting. The DA is going to pick this up, especially with the notary ring involved. They are going to want you to testify. I will, I said. And Brittany? David asked. She is going to spiral. She is going to blame you. Let her, I said. She can blame me from the rental apartment, or she can blame me from a cell. That is no longer my problem to solve. I walked out of the courthouse doors. The humidity of the South Carolina afternoon hit me, but it felt different now. It didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a cleansing fire. I had my name back. I had my house back. And most importantly, I had severed the cord. I checked my watch. It was 2 o'clock. I had 23 hours until I could legally change the locks. But first, I had one more stop to make. I needed to go to the apartment complex and sign the lease for the unit I had offered them, not because I owed them, and not because I forgave them, but because I was not them. I did not leave children behind. I paid my debts, and this was the final payment I would ever make to the Caldwell family. The forensic audit report arrived on my desk 3 weeks after the emergency hearing, landing with a heavy, satisfying thud. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the document that converted my family's emotional manipulation into cold, hard criminal facts. The investigation had been thorough. The digital forensics team I hired, working in tandem with the bank's fraud unit, had mapped out the entire scheme. It was not a spur-of-the-moment decision by a desperate mother. It was a calculated operation. The report confirmed that Brittany had been in contact with Silas Thorne, the disgraced notary, for over a month. They had exchanged text messages discussing asset liberation and loophole exploitation. Brittany had paid him $2,000 up front, money she likely borrowed from my parents under false pretenses, to draft the fake deed and set up the shell company for the loan transfer. But the most damning evidence was the identity theft. The logs showed that my email had been accessed from Brittany's IP address 47 times in 10 days. She had been reading my correspondence, deleting warnings, and waiting for the DocuSign links. She had studied my life so she could steal it. The district attorney did not hesitate. Brittany was indicted on 3 felony counts: forgery in the first degree, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft, because the amount she attempted to steal exceeded $10,000, and because it involved a bank, the potential sentencing guidelines were severe. The weeks leading up to the final sentencing hearing were a blur of desperate phone calls from numbers I had blocked. My parents tried everything. They sent letters. They showed up at my office building, only to be turned away by security. They left voicemails ranging from tearful pleading to venomous rage. I did not respond. I communicated only through the assistant district attorney assigned to the case. The plea deal meeting was the last time I saw them all in the same room. It was held in a small, windowless conference room at the courthouse. Brittany sat between her public defender and my parents. She looked thinner, her roots grown out, the suburban mom facade completely eroded by the reality of impending incarceration. The prosecutor laid out the offer. If Brittany pleaded guilty to all counts, the state would recommend 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and full restitution for legal fees and damages. If she refused, they would go to trial, and they would seek a custodial sentence of 3 to 5 years in state prison. Probation? My father asked, his voice hopeful. So she doesn't go to jail? Provided she adheres to strict conditions, the prosecutor said. one of which is a permanent restraining order barring her from any contact with the victim, Morgan Rogers, or her property. Brittany looked at me across the table. Her eyes were red. "Morgan," she whispered, "please, you can tell them to drop it. If you just sign a waiver. They said they might drop the charges. I will pay you back. I swear." I looked at her. "With what money?" "Brittany, you sold my furniture for pennies. You have no job. You have no assets. The only thing you have is a history of taking things that do not belong to you." "We will pay," my mother interjected. She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "Dad and we talked to a financial advisor. We can cash out a portion of our 401k. We can give you $20,000 right now if you just stop this." I stared at the checkbook. It was pathetic. They were willing to burn their own retirement, their own safety net, just to enable her one last time. They were willing to bankrupt themselves to keep her from facing the consequences of her own malice. "You cannot buy your way out of a felony, Mom," I said coldly. "The bank is the victim too. The state is the victim. I am just the witness." "But you are the sister," my mother cried out. "How did she even get the information? Morgan? She said she just found it. She didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at Brittany. She flinched. "Tell her," I said to Brittany. "Tell Mom where you got my social security number. Tell her where you got the deed reference number and the exact date of my purchase." Brittany looked down at her hands. "I found them in the filing cabinet," she mumbled. "Which filing cabinet?" I pressed. "Mom's," Brittany whispered. The room went silent. My mother's hand froze on her checkbook. "What?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "The metal box in your closet," Brittany said, her voice barely audible. "The one marked important. You had copies of everything, Morgan's deed, her tax returns from 3 years ago, her birth certificate. You scanned them all." I looked at my mother. Her face drained of color. "I kept them for safekeeping," my mother stammered, looking frantically between me and my father. "In case something happened to you, Morgan, in case you got sick or died. I needed to know where your assets were so we could handle your estate. It was for your protection." The twist twisted the knife in my gut. My mother hadn't just enabled the crime. She had curated the toolkit for it. She had stockpiled my private financial data, not out of love, but out of a morbid desire to control my assets in the event of my death. She had been waiting for me to be gone so she could distribute my success to the needy members of the family. And because she was careless, because she couldn't say no to Brittany, she had let the fox right into the henhouse. "You archived my identity," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. "And you let her raid the archive." "I didn't know," my mother sobbed. "That is the problem," I said. "You never know. You just allow." I stood up. I looked at the prosecutor. "I accept the terms of the plea deal regarding restitution and the restraining order," I said. "But I want one more condition added to the record." "Which is?" the prosecutor asked. "I want a full allocution," I said. "I want her to admit, on the record, in open court, exactly what she did and who helped her. I want there to be no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no family dispute. I want the world to know it was theft." Brittany nodded, defeated. "I will do it." I turned to my parents. "Put the checkbook away," I said. "I don't want your money. I don't want your retirement. And I don't want your excuses." I leaned in close, looking my father in the eye. "This is the last time we speak," I said. "If you contact me, I will report it as a violation of the Victim Witness Protection Protocols. If you show up at my office, I will have you trespassed. You chose her. Now you can take care of her." I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I heard my mother wailing my name, but it sounded distant, like a noise from a television in another room. I kept walking until I hit the sunlight of the street. The next 2 months were a flurry of logistical reconstruction. With the legal battle settled and the restraining order in place, I finally had full, uncontested possession of the beach house. I drove down to Harbor Point alone, I stood in the driveway and looked at the house. It looked tired. The lawn was overgrown. There was a cracked window on the second floor. I unlocked the front door, not with a key, but with a new biometric fingerprint scanner I had installed the day the sheriff removed Brittany. The smell hit me first. Stale milk, damp carpet, and neglect. The house had been stripped. The mid-century credenza was gone, obviously, but so were the lamps, the toaster, the towels. She had taken everything that wasn't bolted down before the eviction deadline. It didn't matter. Stuff was just stuff. The structure was still mine. I hired a crew. We didn't just clean, we purged. I had the carpets ripped out and replaced with hardwood. I had the walls repainted from a soft beige to a crisp, clean white. I wanted every molecule of air that Brittany had breathed to be scrubbed from the premises. I replaced the furniture she had stolen, but I didn't try to replicate the old look. I bought new pieces, sharper, more modern. This wasn't just a renovation, it was a rebranding. This house was no longer a family retreat, it was a business asset. I interviewed 3 property management firms before selecting one. I signed a contract with a strict clause, no family rentals, ever. I set the price at market rate, targeting corporate executives and long-term vacationers. Within 10 days of relisting, we had a tenant, a writer from New York who wanted the place for 6 months to finish a novel. He paid $4,000 a month, up front. That check, combined with the damages restitution that began garnishing Brittany's wages from her new job at a diner, went straight into my business account. I launched my consultancy firm, Rogers Risk Advisory, exactly on schedule. The seed capital didn't come from the HELOC Brittany tried to steal. It came from the honest rental income of the property she tried to take. There was a poetic justice in that. The asset she wanted to use to destroy me became the engine that built my independence. 6 months later, I returned to the house for a routine inspection between tenants. It was late afternoon. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the marsh grass in hues of gold and violet. I walked out onto the deck. The air was salty and clean. My phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. David. Subject: Update on restitution. Message: The court has processed the first payment from the garnishment. It is $50. It will take her 20 years to pay off the furniture, but the probation officer says she is compliant. Also, your parents have listed their house for sale. Rumor is they are downsizing to an apartment to help cover her legal debts. Thought you should know. I looked at the screen. My parents were selling the home I grew up in to pay for the crimes committed in the home I bought. The cycle of enabling had finally cost them everything. I felt a strange emotion. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was simply relief. It was the feeling of setting down a heavy backpack after hiking for 30 years. I deleted the email. I didn't need to know. I put the phone in my pocket and leaned against the railing. I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore. They were relentless, powerful, and indifferent. They didn't care about deeds or mortgages or family drama. They just existed. I pulled the key to the house out of my pocket. It was a heavy brass master key. I held it up to the dying light. For years, I thought this key opened a door to a house. I thought it represented success. I thought if I worked hard enough, bought enough nice things, and shared them with the people who were supposed to love me, I would be safe. I was wrong. This key didn't open a house. It opened a cage. By locking them out, I had finally set myself free. Peace wasn't about having a view of the ocean. Peace was about knowing exactly who held the keys to your life, and never, ever letting them go again. I turned around, walked back inside my beautiful, empty, quiet house, and locked the door behind me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether you think I was too harsh or if I did the right thing. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.